process, it can always be improved slightly, and that's where AFSA comes in to offer some suggestions for improving. I think this meeting is part of that improvement. It's a part of the outreach and transparency needed to fully understand this complex and important issue. I want to have a special shout out to my colleague, the State VP for AFSA, Matthew Asada, who has really spearheaded this and led this effort from AFSA's perspective, and what will lead to, I'm quite confident, of a really good improvement, in an already strong system. So thanks to him. I think I want to make sure we're all not starting to engage in Cuba negotiations, because next door is the Cuba talks. So if anyone is here for Cuba, that's next door. But if you're here to discuss the State Department's assignment restrictions process, you're in the right room. So again, thanks to everyone, and I'm going to turn over to Matthew to chair the meeting. Thank you, Matthew.
Well, I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming out today. We're short on room space here at the Department of State, and we just want to acknowledge and thank everyone for coming out here. We realize it's a little bit tight quarters, a little small, but this event really has attracted unparalleled interest from employees. And I just want to recognize again some of our partners, as Bob mentioned, Sharon Wong from OPM, Breen Tariq from the White House Initiative on Asian American and Pacific Islanders. We have obviously our other panelists here today, Dexter from the AFSA-AAFAA-EEOC, Tom Wong, the president of the Asian American Foreign Affairs Association. We have representatives from Human Resources, our Career Development Assignments, Gita Passi, our director, the head of our labor negotiations, Steve Folson, representatives, colleagues from Diplomatic Security, and others here in the room. Our Office of Civil Rights. This is an issue that affects, again, 240 of our colleagues. And it's not just those 240 colleagues that currently have the assignment restriction today. It's anyone that's ever gone through this process, or anyone that has not yet gone through the process but is concerned about what it means for their own career. And that's why when AFSA took this on board about 2 years ago, our first step in the process was to try to get data, try to get a sense of how many people were actually impacted by this problem. We had heard anecdotally 25, 50, 100, and we asked the department several times, just tell us how many people are impacted by this program. And the Department of State was unable to provide a listing of individuals, how many people were under an assignment restriction or preclusion, and then how many of those people obviously were of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different genders. And it was only through our cooperation with the Asian American Foreign Affairs Association that we were able to start to get anecdotal evidence. We heard from members that have been precluded from different countries in Asia, different countries in Europe, different countries even in Latin America, Western Hemisphere affairs. And we started to realize that this issue was a lot larger than we once thought. And it affected a lot more people than we were ever led to believe. And so what we did, AFSA, over the course of a year, was come up with, again, some suggested reforms to the system. Something that would improve the transparency of how this program is implemented. It would improve the department's accounting of how many people were affected by it. And most importantly, it would introduce an appeals mechanism, a way for employees to take a look at the assignment restriction that had been placed on them, talk about maybe some of the things that may or may not be correct, and then see if there's an outside body that can take another look at that process. And we used as the basis the appeals process that currently exists for the security clearances. Today, if you lose your security clearance, if it's denied, revoked, you have an opportunity to appeal that outside of diplomatic security. It goes to the Security Appeals Panel that is chaired by the Undersecretary of State for Management, and has 2 assistant secretaries on that body as well, one of which is usually the Director General, representing Human Resources. DS is represented. They bring their case as to why there should be no clearance, and the employee has the opportunity to appeal that, perhaps with AFSA, perhaps with outside attorney, or perhaps just on their own. And we thought that was a very good model, that using that model to challenge, again, an assignment restriction was appropriate. It's something that, frankly, there is no appeals process today. And again, the documents that we provided outside talk a little bit more about why that's an issue, why that's a concern. And you'll be hearing a little bit later from Tom about how this has impacted some of their members overseas and here at home. It's a process that, again, had brought us to partners such as EEOC, to the initiative, to others, as we looked at whether or not this was, again, having a disparate impact on Asian Americans. Were our first generation and second generation employees able to fully serve their country? Or did they have limitations? Or when employees married, foreign-born spouses, how would that impact their career? Was there a difference in how men were treated when they married foreign-born spouses as compared with women? When our female colleagues married foreign-born spouses, we find that there's some difference in treatment. And again, these are all the issues that we really want to get a handle on, we want to address. And so 2 weeks ago, in the midst of Asian American Heritage Month and the week of celebrations, we had an opportunity to present to the department leadership, to the Deputy Secretary of State, the Deputy Secretary for Management and Resources, the Undersecretary for Management, 6 Assistant Secretaries, and others that are sitting on the Diversity Governance Council today, describing why this was so problematic, describing why we need change today. And we're hopeful that the department will take this on board and will decide to reform the system from within, that they'll institute the appeals process, they'll figure out how many employees are affected by these programs, that there'll be an annual accounting to employees and to Congress as to how these tools are being utilized. And so we left that meeting with some hope that the department would start taking a look and be able to address this by the end of the year. At the same time, we realized that, again, there are other partners out there, partners EEOC, partners on the Hill, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee is currently, right this moment, drafting legislation that will require the Department of State to institute an appeals process. We expect that legislation to be introduced the first week of June. So either way, whether it's coming from within or coming from without, we're optimistic that this process will change. But until it does, what we like to do is talk to you a little bit about what you can do in the system right now if you're confronted with this issue. You can hear from DSs procedurally what's available to you, what mechanisms available to you. And then we will have an opportunity for people here in the room to ask questions about whether it's their personal situation, whether it's just anecdotes that they've heard. And again, our visitors from the other agencies, from the White House Initiative, they want to hear from people, and whether, again, if you're personally affected by it or if you just know of people that are, it's really an opportunity to hear. That part of the conversation will be off the record, i.e. it will not be recorded. We are just recording our opening remarks today for the benefit of those overseas. We had about 3 dozen or so people write in right after we sent the announcement saying, hey, I'd love to be there. Please record this. We need to hear this advice and guidance overseas as well. So with that being said, I had actually some comments that I'm going to share from personal stories that came back to us after we notified the employee base about this event, but I'm going to share those till off the record. But at this point, I just want to turn it over to Dexter for some opening remarks, and then we'll have Tom get us started.
So good afternoon, and thank you for standing. It's more packed than you told me. And it's a pleasure to be here with AFSA and the State Department. I want to thank AFSA and Matthew for his leadership in terms of bringing this issue to light. In the sense of EEOC, we're an independent federal agency. We're not a part of the State Department. We're not a part of the Justice Department. We're independent, bipartisan commission. We have 5 commissioners, presidential appointees. The president designates one of the commissioners as the chair. Our chair is Jenny Yang, and she's been chair for getting close to a year, a little bit less than a year. She's been a commissioner about a year and a half. She's the chair for almost 6 months. And the way that our organization operates is that we have, the commissioners are responsible for big policy issues, but then we have offices that are assigned to different segments of employment. We have 53 field offices around the country where we hear issues of discrimination that's raised in the private, state, local, are brought to EEOC. And so a lot of times when you see EEOC in the news, you'll see things like EEOC versus something, because we sue a lot of companies. We have litigation authority in federal court. EEOC versus Waffle House, EEOC versus Coca-Cola, EEOC versus Walmart, EEOC versus Walmart, EEOC versus Walmart, EEOC versus Walmart. Every once in a while we'll sue Target just to throw them off. And we have a strong litigation strategy to enforce the anti-discrimination laws that Congress put in place over the last 50 years. This July we celebrate our 50th year as a federal agency. And we're looking at, impact that we've had over 50 years and the impact we need to have on the next 50 years. So as we really started to look at what we're doing at EEOC, we're not a large agency, not as large as State Department, but we're very regional and very, resource strapped in certain ways. We had to come up with some strategic priorities as an agency. If we want to have an impact, the same impact we've had on the first 50 years, what are the things we need to do in the next 50 years? So we met together as an organization, did some strategic planning, did some enforcement planning. And we came up with like 6 priorities that EEOC would focus on over the next 4 years to try to have an impact on this nation in terms of employment discrimination. And I'll just share some of them with you and then share the intersection between that and what we're talking about today. The first priority was to deal with eliminating systemic barriers to hiring. We still have issues where we have organizations that use testing and things of this way to screen out folks that have a disparate impact on certain groups. So we really want to get to those large systemic areas that really can have an impact across industries. Our second area that we identified was to protect immigrant, migrant, and other vulnerable workers. Some folks, especially if they're new to this country, they don't trust the government, they are put in extremely difficult work situations. We've had slave labor camps. We've had some of the worst, most egregious cases that you can ever hear of in the last 10 years that folks don't even know that go on inside our borders. And so we're looking at vulnerable populations. So there are 4 other ones. I'm not going to go to all, I'm going to stop there because in terms of those priorities, each 6 priorities, each segment of EEOC, and I represent the federal sector. The federal government is the largest employer, so we have an office that's dedicated just to federal sector and federal sector issues. Because Congress and President since Truman have always had this expectation that the federal government would be the model employer. That if you want to look at an organization that maximizes the capabilities and competencies of all its citizens, then the federal government should be that place. So with the federal government, we do oversight. So as we had these 6 strategic priorities, we had to figure out how we're going to implement it in each one of these segments. So in the federal sector, which I'm the Associate Director of the Office of Federal Operations, we looked at what are the things that we need to do. Instead of giving you all the 6 priorities and stop with the second one, because who are the immigrant, migrant, and vulnerable workers? We don't have immigrant and migrant workers in the federal sector. So we had to identify who are the vulnerable employees. So we identified 4 different vulnerable employees in the federal sector. Students, interns, volunteer employees, were just, because in this millennia, folks are drastically underemployed. And so they will tolerate certain work situations that others will not, and that can be exploited. So that's one. Contract employees that work for the federal government are also equally vulnerable in similar way. The other one that affects what we're talking about today are employees that have to work under national security clearance issues. And we identified them because because of court cases over the last 3 decades, if an agency elicits national security interest, it can limit the scope of our inquiry into whether or not the practice was discriminatory. And so we found over the years a lot of employees really were under this cloud of national security, but really instead of questioning whether or not, the merits of the security determination, were they given due process to really input the information they need for an effective determination and how transparent are these processes. So as we started this process of looking at security clearances, our focus became heavily and almost exclusively on the intelligence community. tomorrow I'm meeting with the Office of Director of National Intelligence because that's where our focus lied initially. As we started interfacing with other groups and really appreciated Matthew and AFSA actually raising this issue with us because it very much related to what we're dealing with in terms of the IC. I'll just say the IC. I'm sure you guys are somewhat familiar with the intelligence community. And the assignment restriction issue was an issue that we saw on the IC side, but it kind of paralleled what we were seeing at State Department. So as we started having conversations with folks at State Department, trying to understand the issue, we've done a couple smaller listening sessions, thanks to Tom Wong, who actually came over and brought a few employees to share some of the ways in which they believe that their careers have been staggered and hampered because of assignment restrictions. It became a part of our overall inquiry into this issue of security clearances and how it affects opportunities, specifically for certain groups, and it relates to national origin. So we're not judgmental. We don't want to come into this saying there's a bad actor or pointing the finger at these things, because we have a clear realization at EEOC that national security is something of the highest priority of this nation. It should be. And EEOC does not want to be in a position where we're questioning whether or not national security is compromised. Our focus is on, just like with hiring, is the process fair? And what are the elements of transparency and fairness that we can look at and improve? So one thing about equality of opportunity from our perspective is it's not stagnant. It changes every time we change processes, new groups are introduced into our environment. We need to constantly revisit what we've done in the past. What we found over the years, even though when we opened our doors 50 years ago, there were folks saying, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, you can't come in. We don't have folks standing in the front of the State Department saying, no, you can't come in. We have systems that's embedded into processes that hamper opportunity. And it takes a real educated, analytical approach and an openness to looking at your processes to actually facilitate what we call civil rights in this new millennium. So as a part of our examination in this area, we really are thankful to State Department for recognizing this, in particular for DS to be here today, to actually, be a part of the conversation. And that's always a great opening opportunity. And so Matthew will have to look, because I'll talk all day. No one will get a chance to have an opportunity. I did want to acknowledge my good colleague, Sharon Wong from OPM, because we have joint initiatives that we're working on that affect the Asian American Pacific Islander work group that we've been working on for at least a half a decade. And these types of issues are of the utmost importance to us in federal service. And my last one I have to do is I have to thank my good partners from the Office of Civil Rights, who I've worked with for many years, Janice, and Tubi's here somewhere. And, who always have been a great interface between EEOC and State Department. So thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Dexter. And again, I think one of the things that with the Office of Civil Rights, every year they put together a report called the MD 715 report. And this is reporting on the State Department's employment of people from different backgrounds, identifying barriers to advancement. And one thing that they did identify in 2012 was that there was underrepresentation in the Foreign Service at different levels. And for Asian Americans, it takes place at the senior Foreign Service level. And what we have looked at is the fact that these assignment restrictions are potentially one of the factors that's contributing to that lack of diversity at the senior levels, because people have not been able to serve in certain countries, not been able to accumulate the regional experiences that they need in order to advance. And I would just say that there's, things have changed over time. And at different places, everyone can point to, well, what about this guy? We have that guy, he's that background and he's working in that country. And, we're very proud that President Obama nominated, the first Korean American to serve as ambassador to Korea, the first Chinese American to serve as the new director of our institute in Taiwan. And the challenge that we have is that we're not sure that today those two individuals would have been able to serve in those places, that they themselves would have been restricted or precluded under the current regime, under the current practices. And so in order to ensure that we have the next Sung Kim, the next Kin Moy, we need to take a real hard look at these assignment restriction programs to ensure that no one's advancement, no one's opportunity is being limited. And with that being said, again, this is where we're going to turn the program over to Tom Wong, to talk a little bit about the Asian American Foreign Affairs Association. And again, from now on, the conversation will not be recorded, and it will be off the record to allow for a frank and open conversation with those people here in the room.
Okay, well, thanks, Matt.